Nothing that we can do will ever take back what happened to them. But what we can do is offer support, we can believe them, and we can provide hope that there is a path to healing. The mission of the Rape Recovery Center is to empower those who've been victimized by sexual violence through advocacy, crisis intervention, and therapy, and to educate the community on the cause, impact, and prevention of sexual violence. The statistics are so high. 1 in 4 women in the US and 1 in 3 in Utah will be sexually assaulted. We have a mobile response team that responds to hospitals and clinics, provide them resources, let them know what their rights are. We also operate a crisis line. We're not using interpreters. We're using folks who are bilingual and bicultural to be able to meet people where they are. What we have seen is the majority of our clients fall at or below the poverty line. And so we work on making sure that our programs, our services, our office is inclusive and accessible. The Rape Recovery Center believes you, and we're here to offer support.
It's Big Shotty, Big Shotty, Big Shotty, Big Shotty.
Welcome to the Morning Cup of Culture Show. I'm your host, Brooke Black. This is a community of inclusiveness, diversity, and belonging through social justice, culture, and music. Today, we're actually focusing really heavy on community engagement. I'm so excited we're going to be having this conversation. I have a local organization that is a nonprofit 501c. It's called Rape Recovery Center. And I have 2 individuals that represent that organization. Natalee, why don't you give us an intro on what you do for your organization?
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalee Cervantez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the outreach coordinator for the Rape Recovery Center. What I do is I go out into community spaces and help organize by providing information for the Rape Recovery Center and our resources, as well as education. And I also run the social media accounts for Rape Recovery Center.
Thank you so much for what you do with this organization. Jorge, let's get an intro from you on what you do for the organization.
Hi, my name is Jorge Barraza. I'm the prevention coordinator. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the prevention coordinator with Rape Recovery Center. So I do a lot of partnerships with different orgs around the valley to kind of try to build a culture of consent. I like to say our consent culture. So trying to change our communities and our society to get to a point where, rape is not accepted, and not tolerated.
Let's dig into that, the consent culture. Where did you originate that? Is that your own curation, or is that something that was, a collective idea through the Rape Recovery Center?
I'm sure somebody else has coined that term before. I was doing, when I first started, I think for a long time, on the prevention side of things, we've been doing this whole like prevention is refusal skills, prevention is harm reduction or self-defense, or like telling people not to rape, and that's not real prevention. I find that people are a lot more willing to engage if you give them a positive solution instead of just a negative. I always say, like, the best way to avoid red flags is to aim for green flags. Because if you're just trying to avoid red flags, you're still not getting anywhere healthy. What you want to do is have healthy relationships, have healthy consent, things like that. So I was working on a presentation about rape culture, and that's a very strong term. It's very loaded. A lot of people tend to disengage as soon as they hear that. So I find it a lot more effective at engaging people when I talk about consent culture, and like everyone nod to that, like, oh, that makes sense. So I started naming my presentations consent culture and talking about, the ways in which we can be positive and make a healthier community.
Are you okay? Are you okay if I name this consent culture?
Sure. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we'll get more engagement, right?
Yeah. No, it's true, right? It's honestly, like when I first started, I was using, pre-existing presentations, and I'd go into like middle schools or high schools to give presentations, which I do on a regular basis. And I'll be honest, most of the girls stayed very engaged, and a lot of the boys would disengage and lay their heads down and stuff. Once I started reshaping the messaging to more about how we all are part of this, we all sometimes make mistakes, and we all need to be accountable for what we do, and we can be better. I started getting more and more questions and engagement from the boys in the classroom. I always like to say, like, in Hunter High School, I did a presentation there, and there's always a table of cowboys in the back. These, young men, with their plaid shirts. I love them, and they tend to laugh and like, make light of anything you're presenting. And that used to be my experience, but now I get some of the best questions from those guys in the back, which encourages me. Like, people are willing to engage as long as you give them the space to do so.
How long has the Rape Recovery Center been in operation?
So we started out in 1974, and what really started it was a small group of volunteers. They would get together in Salt Lake, and they created a local community rape awareness program. So they put together the first team of volunteers. They would go to hospital emergency rooms and support survivors of rape and sexual assault. And it wasn't until 1975 the Salt Lake Rape Crisis Center was incorporated. And that's when it became the nonprofit organization. And we had a 24-hour crisis line in place.
Is that crisis line still active?
Yes, we do still have a crisis line. It's incorporated statewide as well. So people can call into that when something happens. And our client liaison team and our crisis operators, they'll answer those phone calls for people and assist with what's happened.
What's the phone number?
So our phone number is 801-467-7282.
Thank you. Going back to Jorge, when did you start doing the high school, junior high outreach consent culture presentations?
Well, we've been doing high school presentations on consent and boundaries for years now. And so I started with the Rape Recovery Center about 3 years ago. And again, it's all age appropriate. So for middle schools, we talk about boundaries and, kind of healthy relationships. We might talk about hugging, kissing, and kind of relationships and how we treat each other. In high school, then we do go more into like a sexual violence overview of what sexual violence is, the prevalence of it, and some of the issues that cause it. So over the last 3 years, I've been kind of changing that more to, more like what can we do, or let's think about how we can create a consent culture.
So going into these schools, dealing with the community at large, if someone wants to commission you for a presentation or education, what's the first step for that?
You can contact our office number, or just find our information on our website, raperecoverycenter.org. And if you go into About Us, there's a staff. You can find me or anyone in our education. And it's not just schools. I think one of the things I do find a little bit frustrating about this work is that when I say, oh, I'm about teaching consent and healthy relationships or creating dialogues about that, everyone tells me, oh, great, come talk to our youth. And I'm like, well, I need to talk to you.
Right?
I mean, I know, because I got to tell you, a lot of times, and I was saying earlier when we were talking a little bit that, the youth tend to get it. It's usually the adults who are very stubborn. I did a presentation once where I had a friend who was an adult friend who worked at the school, decided she was going to sit in on this presentation. And so I'm talking about victim blaming, all these things, how we respond when someone discloses, and all the students are like, oh, great. Yeah. Like what you wear isn't consent. What you're doing isn't consent. Consent is actual consent, agreeing, being very clear about what you're consenting to. And when it was, all the young students were like, yeah, that makes sense. Cool. And as soon as they left, she came up to me and was like, but the way some of these girls dress nowadays. And I'm like, did you not hear what I just said? And I am finding that resistance more with adults than with youth. And I would want to talk to more adults because they have more exposure to their kids, right? A lot of times, especially up on the hill, we say like, well, that shouldn't be taught at schools, that should be taught at home, but the parents don't know it either because they were never taught. So one of my goals is not just schools. I want to teach at churches, businesses. I've done at bars, I've done different places. So anyone that wants to talk about how their organization, business, or group can help create a culture of consent, I'm more than happy to present for.
Now, being a 501c3, you guys are all, you apply for grants. Let's say someone wants to donate to your cause. What's the best step in donating or volunteering to help with the message, with the movement?
So I would say that we do donations on our website. If you go to raperecoverycenter.com, there is a button on our and a link on our website homepage where people can go and donate. And if people are interested as well in volunteering, you can visit our website as well, and you go to the Get Involved page. There's a lot of opportunities, especially helping out with our crisis line, being able to take the load off some of the people who are already working endlessly and supporting survivors in that way. We also do a lot of volunteer opportunities for events as well as campaigns that we have. And usually once a month we do open houses. Just because of COVID, we haven't been able to do open houses in person yet. But what we'll do is a virtual open house over Zoom. People can sign up on our website and they'll see a presentation by our outreach team. And we talk about our services, opportunities, as well as how people can get involved in any way.
I love that. Now, you guys, we touched on it just a little bit. So it was, gosh, how many, like 60 years you guys have been?
Almost 50.
Almost 50.
74.
So 50 years ago was a much different culture than you have today. So when you guys go to the hospital response and you have a victim or potential victim, I want to dig into that, like, because some people aren't aware that they're a victim. They either drank too much or they blacked out, or maybe they don't know that like not saying no isn't okay either. So when you have a victim or a potential victim that's at the hospital, does the hospital reach out to you? Would the client reach out to you? Like, how would someone acquire your services that may feel like they've been a victim of a crime or victim of non-consent?
Yeah, the medical facilities actually have protocols for that. So they have our number. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand that or even know that we do that. So our hospital response team is available 24/7. So when somebody reports an assault at a medical facility or even law enforcement, they'll contact us, and we have people on call 24/7. Anywhere in Salt Lake County, we'll go out and respond to that person, kind of advocate for them, let them know what their rights are, what they can do, what they can't do, sometimes helping out, filling out forms. Honestly, some of the volunteers that do this work, I am just amazed at the training they have to go through and then being willing to do this very heavy work. I mean, they drive around with a trunk full of bags of extra underwear and clothes and stuff, because when you have a forensic exam, if you choose to do so, I mean, it can be re-traumatizing to have someone have to touch you all over again. Sometimes you have to leave your clothing as evidence. So those are the things that I think even I didn't realize we did when I first started here. It took me a while to realize the impact of that, having someone there who can stand up for you. Sometimes the survivor doesn't want us there, so we'll just sit in the hallway in case they change their mind. And that can be 2 to 6 hours for a forensic exam. So it's a long period, and it's invaluable to have someone there who is, again, we're not part of law enforcement, we're not part of government, we're not part of the medical system. We're here just for the victim.
Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional just from personal experience. So let's talk about the people who are victims that don't report, that don't speak up. Obviously, we want to reach those people as well. So people who don't want to, report a crime, or people that don't They just want to know more, they want to get help or someone to talk to. What would you say to those people, or how can we help those people?
I would say that there's always help for them. Always, there's always going to be something available for them. The Rape Recovery Center is always going to be there for them for their needs, whether that might be not reporting and needing support in like therapy, needing group services, people to talk to, or other types of advocacy services like finding housing, transportation, clothing, those types of means. Yeah, the Rape Recovery Center, we want to make sure to let people know, like, no, if you don't choose to report, that's okay. Like, there will still be people here to support you and people here to help you, especially no matter when something might have happened to you. It doesn't matter if it happened 10 years ago, yesterday, weeks ago, we would still be here to help out and support in any way we can.
And on that point, you know, something I always like to make sure people understand is there's a lot of reasons why people don't report. And I know a lot of survivors feel guilty about not reporting, or people will say like, why won't you call the police? I mean, but sexual violence is way more complicated than the way we think it is. There's this myth of stranger danger that rape is committed by someone who jumps out of a dark alley or behind a bush. But the fact is over 85% of survivors of sexual violence know their perpetrator. So sometimes it's someone you love and it's too difficult to report. So no matter what the complicated situation may be, we're here to help you heal, no matter what your decision is on how you want to deal with it.
Let's talk about how you heal. Now, you guys have education, you have prevention, but you also have services. What services and group therapy, presentations, prevention, what do those look like for a client?
So I would say we have individual therapy services for clients. So when they do an intake process, or even if they call in, we can get them set up with intake services at no cost. And we really tried to help out just because we know a lot of people might be in situations where they don't have the specific funds, or, you know, think they can't get therapy services. They can through Rape Recovery Center, just because we are no cost services. As well as we, with individual therapy, you know, they get to help and really the client themselves and the victim, they get to see what really works for them and what they want from therapy, for sure. So I feel like our clinical team really does an amazing job. We also have bilingual therapists as well, and we can get translator services too. We just want to make sure, you know, that anyone who needs those services, they have that available to them. And we also do offer group services. So usually depending on the time of the year, we have different groups going on, and those groups are specific to different demographics as well. So we have some on you know, BIPOC populations, LGBTQ plus. We also have groups for men, as well as a connections group, so people can come and check in and go when they please. That way they're not, you know, forced to go every week, but when they really need support from others, they can go and check out that group. So we try a lot to make sure that we're serving populations that really historically have been underserved, and making sure that we're inclusive enough so that they can get services for individual therapy as well as group and community too. And also we do like yoga, meditation sometimes. So it's different events, but it's great. I love the team that we have at the Rape Recovery Center.
And I think from those efforts, that's where like outreach kind of evolved, right? Letting people know that we have those services, and outreach turned into education, and over time education turned into prevention, which is like, again, yes, we should support survivors, but let's try to avoid having survivors. You know, let's try to avoid having it happen in the first place. So it's a pretty wide gamut that we're trying to cover of the whole spectrum of sexual violence.
One thing that you mentioned, Natalie, that you broke up a little bit, the audio is a little off. You said you have bilingual services and translation services. That's awesome. Yes. I also know that you guys do the New American and Refugee Services. What does that look like?
So that's a grant that we received, a program that we're working on, where we are actually focusing on talking about sexual violence, consent, and healthy relationships with refugees and immigrant populations, which are historically underserved. It's always kind of amazing to me that, especially like refugees, right now we're working with a lot of Afghani refugees, and they've got a lot on their plate already, coming to a new country, culture shock and everything, and they're still willing to carve out, an hour to a week to meet with us and talk about, what is sexual violence, and a lot of questions are about like, that culture shock, that difference here, of like, you can get in trouble here for this. Yeah. Right. And so they're very receptive to that. And so we're proud of being able to do that. We're doing that in partnership with International Rescue Committee, IRC. And we're working with several Afghan cohorts, as well as other refugee organizations. And we'll be doing some work with Latino men and also with Pacific Islander men over the next year or so.
I love that you guys have a huge focus on the other, right? Men, LGBTQ, refugees. At what point do you feel, I know we touched on it a little bit, but the adult community, right? This way of living that we've had, this rape culture that we've lived in for so long and has been accepted until someone finally said, hey, enough's enough. At what point do you feel that this is something that should be talked about? Age group, phase of life, like when should we start talking to children about this?
In the lifespan, that's a thing I always say. I saw a quote, a meme on social media a couple of years ago, and I probably say this 2 or 3 times a day as I'm talking to people, and it read, consent is a life skill that should be taught well before it has anything to do with sex.
Let's talk about consent, because we talked a little bit off, consenting to unsolicited advice, consenting to hugs, handshakes, being tagged in social media. How would you define consent?
Ooh, good question. Right. And that's actually a question I usually roll out to a group. I don't bring the definition. I let people decide for themselves. And that's my presentation style. I tend to be more of like, you tell me. Because I always think that people have a lot of expertise, right, already, that we just need to kind of collectively bring it together. But, consent to me is taking care of others, being mindful and empathetic towards others and yourself as well. Right. Because I try to increase people's sensitivity to like something that may make a person uncomfortable. And sometimes we don't see, we have those blinds, they're blind spots for us when we cross those lines. Several years ago, I had a coworker who had a great achievement at work. We were really good friends, and at work, and I went to give her a hug, and she's like, "Oh no, I have trauma around hugging." And I felt so bad. To this day, I still get a little weird when I think about it. So that taught me, like, you know what? Now I ask before I hug someone. And we have this thing in our culture where we have a hard time verbalizing consent. We think it's weird or uncomfortable, but it's not. It really isn't. And if anything, I get a lot of like appreciation, like, "Oh, thanks for asking." And another example of another weird way of which consent can take place, outside of the bedroom. I think we tie consent to sex exclusively, and that's kind of a problem, because when you're a toddler and you want to play with a toy and you ask for it instead of just taking it, you're practicing consent. I mean, and we need to just recognize that and celebrate it and normalize it. But I think a lot of reasons why consent is difficult. So when it comes to lifespan, from the get-go, you can teach consent, because consent is not just about sex. It's about being mindful and caring for others and yourself.
Let's kind of change lanes to a little bit deeper, more intense idea of consent. So a lot of victims, or at least personal experience, someone who's maybe drank too much and doesn't know, they've either blacked out or maybe they've taken drugs, there is that culture, How do you approach that? Like maybe from the victim mindset, and then from the Rape Recovery Center mindset, like how do I identify as a victim? How do I identify knowing, hey, something's happened to me, whatever, I'm questioning, and then from the Rape Recovery Center, how would you guys identify who that potential victim might be?
I think, for us, anyone who approaches us, we're going to support. And I always say, because when I do presentations, a lot of times I do get really tricky questions, right? Like, I know both of the persons. I know the person that perpetrated and the person who was survivor, and I don't know, how do I navigate this situation? I would say, no matter what the situation is, we can always support the survivor. That should be our number one goal. The rest, we'll deal with it later. But first thing we need to focus is on helping that survivor heal. And accountability is an important part of consent culture, right? And we have to be accountable for our own actions as well. But I don't think we have to. That's problematic to me when someone doesn't wonder, am I a victim or not? Typically, you are. I used to work at Utah Domestic Violence Coalition on the hotline. A very common question I'd get, like, I don't know if I'm in a violent relationship, but I thought I'd call. Almost all the time, it was an abusive relationship. And so it's tricky. And a lot of that is our society, right? The way it kind of messages us to feel guilty, maybe because I passed out or because I went to this location or I did something. But again, that's not consent. I would say, like, being naked and passed out in the middle of the street is not consent.
Right.
Yeah.
I think too, with adding that, like, if someone's at the bar and knowing and thinking in their mind, like, oh, I put myself in this situation, it's never your fault and what Jorge's going off of. It doesn't give any consent for what happened to you that happened. And I think that the victim blaming is something that, like, we really want to help. And even with Jorge in prevention, like, really helping people understand that we should not be victim blaming and that we should really be talking about these things in prevention ways and consent ways and pretty much just not letting those things happen, because it's so common in everywhere to hear people say, well, you shouldn't have been wearing that, you shouldn't have been in that situation. Well, why? You shouldn't have even thought about having to do that to someone, having to, not ask for their consent, not respect someone's boundaries. You shouldn't have even you shouldn't have thought about doing those things to someone.
If someone's intoxicated, and incapacitated, then our response would be to take care of that person, make sure they're safe, right? Mm-hmm. Not to take advantage of them. And I think so this whole, they were asking for it, oof, that just boils my blood.
I've never understood that.
Yeah.
I want to flip this on its head a little bit, because there was a comment that was made, and I think that to break down these barriers and stereotypes, we also need to talk to the perpetrators as well. And the reason I say that is because there's got to be people out there that maybe have hurt people that don't want to hurt people anymore. Or maybe there's someone that maybe has these ideas or thoughts in their head that they know are wrong and they just don't know what to do with it. Is there services for those type of people without criminal ramifications that may come for them, so that they feel like they can get help too?
There are some agencies in the state. We actually don't have those type of services, but there are some agencies that are working on that. And that's been a really tough and uphill battle to fight, because I understand why people say, like, don't try to humanize a perpetrator. But the thing is, we can lock up everybody that commits rape and it'll still keep happening.
Right.
What we need to do is understand where perpetration comes from. How do we cross those boundaries? And that's why I say it's critical to start teaching consent at a very young age. Mm-hmm. So you become mindful of, like, that might be something that's not okay for this person, or I should take care of other people. I should take care of myself as well, right? So it's, again, it doesn't have to start with sex, but I think if we normalize asking for consent for hugs or for a kiss or something like that, we're going to reduce sexual violence as well. If you think I only practice consent when I'm in the bedroom, you're going to mess up, because it's a way of thinking about other people, right, and feeling for other people. So it is a tricky balance without trying to minimize the trauma of survivors, and anger they may have, towards a perpetrator. It's not about justifying. Accountability, again, is still a key element of prevention. But we need to do a better job of trying to understand why it happens. And we do have things. There's actually even a CDC toolkit on how to prevent sexual violence, which is about teaching empathy, engaging men and boys, empowering women, creating social norms that allow us, that normalize consent. So there's things we can do as a society, but it's not just one individual.
Right.
And that's a big thing that I think a lot of people don't understand, that sexual violence doesn't just happen in a vacuum between two individuals. It happens in the context of our society and our attitudes and norms.
I want to add to that because I feel like there's this culture, I guess you could say, that it happens in bullying, it happens in, hazing and all of these really negative things that hurt people. So if someone's witnessing a crime or maybe non-consent happening, is there anything that they should be doing or tips that you can give them to empower them to try and want to speak up or, intervene, if you will?
Okay, that's part of the training I also do sometimes.
Of course.
Yeah, it's a bystander intervention, right? And honestly, my goal ideally is that we don't need bystander intervention, right? Because it doesn't happen. But the reality is it does, right? And so I like the fact that you brought up bullying, because I always say you cannot fight sexual violence without also fighting domestic violence, bullying, and all other forms of violence, whether it's racial violence or gender violence or economic, social injustice. All these things play into this and they intersect in really fascinating ways. But if you think about, whether it's domestic violence, which I have a background working in, as well as sexual violence, these are crimes of power and control, right? Someone felt like they were able to just have power and control over a person, over your relationship in a domestic violence situation. Someone feels they're entitled to have power and control over the relationship. Sexual violence, I feel like I have power and control over, your body and what I want to do with it. And when I tie it, and this is one of those things that always gives me hope. When I talk to youth, they get it. I'm like, do you see how that can be similar with bullying, where you feel like you can just pick on someone because nothing's going to happen? Like, it's the same attitude. So we can fight these things by starting with anti-bullying programming in elementary schools. So it's all connected in a way that we don't always recognize, but it's all the same attitude of someone feeling like, entitled, or like they can take advantage of someone because they might be disadvantaged in some way.
Let's talk about your outreach events. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Natalee.
Oh, no, I was just going to add to that I think that going off of what Jorge said, really education all around is the key in talking about history of rape culture, sexual violence, the history of talking about how people use these types of violent acts as power for themselves. So I think that really goes on to talk about how educating the world as a whole is on what started sexual violence and how it's continued through history has been able to help people in understanding what has come to be today.
And, I have to add a little bit more on the bystander intervention, because I got sidetracked. And I always thinking primary prevention, stopping it before it even happens. But when it does happen, we do teach bystander intervention. And I think one of the biggest keys to bystander intervention is recognizing when there's a problematic situation. A lot of times people they think, oh, well, that's normal. They might see somebody taking, I hate this cliche, but like taking someone, a drunk person, into a bedroom and closing the door. A lot of people won't notice that. My daughter's grown up with me, talking and educating about these issues. So she goes to parties and she'll always tell me, like, Dad, I cannot believe the stuff people do, like the way they're harassing women right in front of the security guards, and the security guards aren't even noticing. And I'm short, and I'll go in there and elbow people and tell them, like, hey, calm down, or whatever. So, I mean, we might not always feel safe stepping in and directly intervening. But some of the strategies I teach are, first of all, recognize that there's a situation going on. So be aware of your surroundings. if you feel safe being direct, then be direct. If you don't feel safe, you might want to distract. We call them the D's: direct, distract, delegate, and delay. So direct would be going up to a person and saying, "Hey, is everything okay here? This doesn't look right." Distract would be like going up and say, "Hey, what time is it?" or something to kind of break the moment a little bit. Delegate might be finding somebody who might be like a bouncer at a place, or or an adult, or someone that you feel safe going into. And delay is if there is no safe alternative for you, don't just let it go. Make sure that after it's over, you're checking in on people and making sure that they're okay. If it's your friend that was being problematic, talk to them about what was happening. So those are the strategies that I teach when it comes to bystander intervention.
Now, for these type of strategies that you guys teach, you guys have outreach events and organizations. Let's talk on that. You guys have a campaign called SAM. What is that?
So that is actually in April, and that's Sexual Assault Awareness
Hang
Month.
on, Natalee, repeat that. Sorry, your audio. You said you have a what?
So it's in April, and it's SAM stands for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So it really is a month-long campaign just talking about our services, prevention, education, awareness on sexual violence as a whole. And that really is something that's globally recognized, nationwide recognized, and we do something for it usually every year for SAM. So we'll do a few events. We have and we also do workshops, presentations. Jorge will be in conferences as well, and panels. So we do a lot of things for the month of April just to really amplify Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Okay. Now you guys have a peer advocacy council. What is that?
That's a new program that we'll be starting this next month. And it's actually a group of teen members. It's a group for teens where they can meet on a weekly basis. We can talk about these issues, have activities. They also teach them about civic engagement and the intersection of all these different social justice issues, how they work together, with the goal of having them become peer educators. So when we go into a high school, I got to tell you, I've worked with similar groups before, and it's a huge difference when there's a teen up there talking to teens than when it's this gray bearded guy up there, right? And so, I mean, I think I do a pretty good job, but they engage at a way different level than I can. And not only that, I mean, a lot of schools don't even want us in there. They're afraid of the Rape Recovery Center being in their
school. Or the parents that, let's not go down that road.
Yeah. No, and I understand wanting to protect your child, right? But I think sometimes we kind of get in our own way of protecting our children with these, ideas that aren't based on reality. So being able to have basically, a well-trained teen who's in those spaces, who can facilitate those conversations, even if it's not some, scheduled program, but maybe around the lunch table with friends. It's been proven to be a very effective prevention method for reducing, different forms of violence.
Because it's a teen demographic, does that have to have parent consent for them to get involved?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we'll be having a workshop this next week that's specifically for parents to talk about that programming and what it's going to look like. But yeah, there's extensive forms that have to be filled out.
Let's go to the dark side just one more time, and then we'll have a couple more things and then we'll wrap up. When I say the dark side, I'm talking about the victims that we don't really talk about. So men, maybe adults. I think that what I'm trying to get at is there isn't a cookie cutter of who a victim is or how they're a victim. So let's talk about levels of trauma, if you will. What is the slightest thing someone can be a victim of for them to be considered a victim? Is it touch? Is it vocabulary? How they're talked to? How do we identify those?
I would honestly say it's really any type of form of sexual harassment. It really goes to like the most basic things of being like someone in the workplace, being really provocative or saying these things to someone, and even these types of suggestions. That in itself is really a form of sexual violence. You know, making these small gestures about someone, even I would say like gender violence can even fall into that type of category of sexual violence too. That's super overlooked as well.
And something I always try to push is expand people's understanding of violence, right? I think too often we think of violence as physical punching, kicking, but violence is really anything that makes you feel unsafe in a space, right? Anything that makes you feel unwanted. So indecent exposure is a form of violence, right? Or something that makes you feel, I can't jog in my park because this guy jumps out or this person jumps out, and exposes them to something that's going to make you uncomfortable. But again, like workplace harassment, all the way to, unnecessary touching, there's different levels, right? And we all have different levels of resiliency and what we can tolerate too. But I think a lot of times people don't even realize, how much something has affected them or that it's even happened. To what you said, Brooke, I think there's a lot of survivors who don't even know that they've experienced sexual violence. I know somebody that actually worked in a domestic violence shelter, and after some time took our sexual advocacy training. And when they were done, they said, I've been married for 23 years and raped throughout my marriage, and I didn't even realize it. And it came down hard on her, realizing this. But at the same time, marital rape wasn't even recognized as illegal in the state of Utah till 1994. So 94, yeah. So we still have a lot of those old ways of thinking. I mean, and when we think about rape laws, initially the woman couldn't file a case of rape. It had to be the husband, because the husband was the one that was considered to have been hurt in that rape, not the wife. So we still have a lot of this undoing of old ways of thinking that we have to work on.
When it comes to old ways of thinking and legislator, are there anything right now that's going through the House that we need to pay attention to as far as like processing rape kits, ramifications and consequences for people who are, perpetrators and who have hurt people? Is there anything that we need to be paying attention to with this next legislative session, or something that needs adjusting that you guys are aware of at this time?
I don't know of any specific bills. I know there's several, right? And again, when we're fighting sexual violence, we really have to kind of dismantle all different forms of violence. So when we're seeing, like, say, transphobic laws and stuff, those are part of what causes the issue too, right? A lot of that mentality comes from this old way of thinking, right? But simple things like trying to teach consent in schools can be very difficult to get through legislature. And I understand. And again, that's why I'm a proponent of, well, let's not talk about consent around sex. Let's fund more anti-bullying efforts in elementary schools. There's different ways we can approach it, and I think that most people would agree with, that can avoid some of those kind of areas where people might not feel so comfortable about. So any kind of support for education, continual funding for us would make a huge difference, honestly.
Yeah.
We get 1 year funding, so every year we're spending so much time on just getting next year's funding that it takes up a lot of our energy from the work we want to do.
So if someone wants to get involved, I know we touched on it, let's talk about that again. If I want to get involved, either to volunteer, to become a facilitator for doing some of these outreach events or organizations or presentations, what's the first step for someone to get involved?
I would say the first step for someone who wants to get involved is to sign up for our open house. Really, that in itself, we will cover a lot of information, and we even talk to people and see, some people might prefer doing advocacy services and joining our mobile response team and going to those hospitals. There's also some people who feel like they would do better in a crisis line, or even going to events and doing outreach. So I think that the best first step for them who want to get involved is being in those open houses and trying to figure out, these are my skills, these are what my boundaries are, what I'm comfortable with, and this is where I feel like I can do my part and help. And even with that too, a lot of people, what they can do is helping with when we have our social media postings, like amplifying our workshops we have for people, amplifying the messages we have for the whole state, so people can see what services we offer, what education we provide, as well as what outreach efforts we have going on at that time. And we always, during the Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign, we will have a lot to share with people. We'll have some events going on that we'll post about so people can keep up to date with those. We also have holiday giving campaigns for people who are interested in donating and helping the cause and prevention for sexual violence. So I think definitely asking in our open houses what they can do to help, as well as keeping up to date with what we have online, has really been great. And seeing our outreach efforts reach a large demographic has been really awesome to see that.
And
sorry, go ahead, Jorge.
I was going to add to the volunteering thing. I think you don't even have to sign up with us to help us out, right? I think, increasing awareness and having these discussions, and again, promoting healthy consent goes a long way to helping us out too. My goal is that one day we can close the doors of Rape Recovery Center, that we won't need it.
How do people find you on social media?
So our Instagram, and we are launching a TikTok, so it will be all under @Rape Recovery Center. Also, if you go on any of the links in our bio, it will link you to our website, the peer advocacy group, and we also have a Twitter page and a YouTube channel for people. And the YouTube actually is really awesome because we partner with a wonderful meditation and yoga specialist, and her name is Monica. And she has, we have videos of her uploaded on our YouTube for a lot of our Spanish survivors, so they can access those skills and tools of healing.
I love it. 2 questions, and then we'll be done. I don't know that we're done. We're never done, right? Until those doors are closed.
Yeah.
Is there anything we left out?
I don't think so. I feel like we covered a pretty wide range of all of the Rape Recovery Center. Would you say anything you need to add, Jorge?
I'm sure I can come up with something, but I think we covered it pretty well.
Okay, so I asked all my guests the same question, and you can answer individually or pass. If you were me and you were asking the questions, what question didn't I ask that I should ask?
I think I would say, how do you folks who do this work take care of yourselves? Like what do people do, that are involved in this work every day, that what do they do to take care of themselves and help digest
Self-care.
everything? Yeah.
How do you do that, Natalee?
I would say really checking in with each other. I think a lot of the times, especially with it being virtual, most of the times a lot of us are working from home. It is kind of hard to be surrounded with people and talk to each other, and we don't really have a lot of direct contact, especially in the community engagement team, unless we're going to do presentations or outreach and that type of thing. So usually Jorge and I try and find time to check in on each other and just talk about our days and just try and figure things out and asking for support. I think another thing too is being able to say no and have boundaries of what you can and can't do, because at the end of the day, everyone's just one person. This is a collective effort. And so I think a lot of times people can get caught up in thinking they need to do everything. And I think that happens to Jorge and I sometimes. We want to be there to help and do everything that we can, but we also know, we have support and we have community that we can rely on. So asking for help and asking to take a step back and relax and enjoy your life too, for sure.
How would you answer that question, Jorge?
Not very well all the time, but I try to be very mindful. I think a lot of us who are in these kind of fields are very passionate about it, right? And so we find a lot of sense of purpose and meaning in the work that we do. So it can be harder sometimes to leave work at work, all right? And so being able to accept what I can and can't do, to what Natalee said, also I think it is huge.
Did you have a question you wanted to add to that I didn't ask?
I think a question I'm always kind of dealing with is, why are there not more men in these spaces? You know, I'll go to a national conference, and I would say 5–10% of the people there are male. You know, and when I do a workshop, I did a parenting workshop for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month this month, and I think we had like 40 registrants, about 20 participated. They were all female. I'm like, where are the dads in this? You know, where I think, you know, like I've mentioned before, you know, I think for a lot of times we thought like sexual violence, oh, it's a women's issue, right? And we have this cliche of like the men are the perpetrators and the women are the victims, but we have to really, you know, accept the fact that all genders hurt all genders, and we need to be able to step in, you know, and have our voices heard as well. Because when I'm talking, I've been in workshops with youth where I'm co-presenting with a female facilitator, and I see how different the boys respond when I start talking or when she starts talking. And I wish it wasn't that way. I wish it wouldn't matter, but it does. We need more people normalizing, more men normalizing talking about these issues.
Is there a certain sector of male response team that respond to male victims versus female victims, or is it just in general?
Just, it's, yeah, whoever's available on call at that point. So we do have male, you know, people who work in the hospital response team. We have non-gender binary individuals, and we have women as well.
I love that. I sure appreciate you guys taking the time out and having this really important conversation with me. I want to see you guys again soon. Maybe I can come out in April and do a small, you know, mini something just to check in, really continue to raise awareness, continue to talk about proper consent, and just really deconstructing rape culture, because it's so huge in America. And I mean, going back to the refugees coming here, like, it's got to be a huge culture shock when you come to America and you see this Western way of living and how over-sexualized we are. And it's just, I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate both of you being available for this really important discussion. Is there anything you guys want to add before we wrap up?
Oh, thank you for having us. Obviously, for the opportunity.
Thank you for like letting us talk in the space and letting us have a voice and tell people about everything that's been talked about today.
Absolutely. Morning Cup of Culture, we don't say goodbye, we build communities and make music. If y'all want to be a part of the discussion, have a hot topic you want to discuss, hit me up, morningcupofculture@gmail.com.